I look after the product analytics function at Wejo and help make sure our customers get the most value out of Wejo's data using analytical techniques on data sets of billions of journeys and data points. I work on the latest products and collaborate closely with our products, engineering and commercial teams, to name a few. With a background in science comes an understanding of how to deal with the essential components in analysing massive amounts of data at scale, as well as how to interpret it in a straightforward way for customers. I'm an EV owner and I made the switch back in 2019. For me, it's about the convenience of not having to ever visit a petrol station. For our lifestyle, it really works well to arrive home and charge overnight, getting enough range in the morning to do what we need. On a cost basis, it works out a lot cheaper, about 90% cheaper than driving an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. So this is helped by being on an overnight electricity tariff that offers significant discounts for charging overnight in the early hours of the morning. Even if energy prices on the rise, it will still be 2.5 to 3 pence per mile versus around 15 to 20p per mile for petrol or diesel. Well, with growing EV adoption, we're seeing that this is not uniform across the country, and it's not even uniform within the same states. Certain areas in the US are adopting EVs faster than others, and this creates challenges on a number of fronts. Many of them are quite localized, from charge point operation to providing the right incentives, right down to utility providers. We're looking at this in detail currently, but on an anecdotal level, we're hearing a lot more reports of chargers being full during very peak holiday periods. I think Thanksgiving, Easter, Christmas, and this is really driven by people taking longer journeys in electric vehicles and becoming more comfortable doing so. Even from first-hand experience here in the UK, I've seen chargers that require a queue where on any given typical week you never really see queues, and that's really interesting. So at Wejo, we have a product called Journey Intelligence, which is derived from billions of journeys across the US, and it helps map out where vehicles split into internal combustion engine and electric vehicles like to travel. Now, the key things behind that are where they pass through and where they like to stop. When you stop, how long you're stopping for, how long you're driving, how long you've driven that day. These are all really important considerations because it influences the level of demand of electric vehicle charging that you have. So we've packaged that into our EV Intelligence site selection product. It helps to take in a tremendous amount of really granular and valuable data into visuals that anyone can understand with a clean user interface. Now, using this tool, customers can then prioritize areas that have the greatest EV demand, forecast future revenue and cash flows, and make the right investment decisions to drive that return on capital that everyone's looking for. Taking utilities as an example, we understand what's at the forefront of their minds. It's about capacity being breached, and it's about investing in the right infrastructure at the right time. It's costly to invest uniformly. We want to target it at the feeders and the substations that really benefit from that reinforcement because of an additional requirement from electric vehicles. Now, the utility providers have a ton of expertise in load modeling, within network operators. But what we're doing is we're helping to complement that with connected vehicle data. So, for example, helping them understand penetration of electric vehicles in their operating areas currently, where that might be heading in the future under different scenarios. And then from that and from our deep understanding of where people undertake their journeys, where they stop, how long they stop for, where they pass through, we can then help them identify these new areas that are likely to have a requirement for different levels of charging, level 2 versus level 3. For EV owners, it'll help charge point operators put the right chargers in the right places, aligning to where people are naturally spending their time. So, for example, a level 3 charger, so the likes of Electrify America at 350 kilowatts or a Tesla supercharger at 250 kilowatts, it's many times more expensive than installing a level 2 charger. And the point is, you don't always need that higher speed. For departments of transport and policymakers, it will help them understand the hotspots of EV charging requirements, where they are now and where they will be in the future. Helping to answer questions like, do we need to plan for infrastructure or sites differently versus what we do today? Is there a question around permitting or site planning that we need to address in network planning? What about contracting for new sites? What about future uptake in a specific area of my jurisdiction? Again, it goes back to some of the questions around user experience. So, for example, that holiday peak demand being very different than the normal weekday or weekend around kind of key days like Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, when people are generally taking longer journeys and traveling in volume. And we see this consistently across the US and the United Kingdom as well. So historically, electric vehicles, looking at the last couple of years, drove on average fewer miles than internal combustion engine vehicles in the US. Now, recent work in the UK has highlighted that this might be starting to invert. When we were working with an OEM, we actually saw that the EVs that were sharing data with us on was recording higher average mileage than the internal combustion engine vehicles. On a second note, we looked at also in the US how far vehicles drove on a given day for an entire month. And we actually observed that 80% of internal combustion engine vehicles never drive for more than 160 miles a day. And trips of that length and longer are actually relatively rare. That same number for hybrids is around 135 miles. And for electric vehicles, it's about 116 miles. What that means is that actually for a large majority of the population, switching to an EV is a practical possibility. There's lots of competitively priced vehicles today, such as Chevy Bolt EV, around $25,000 to $30,000, with a range of 259, 260 miles, which would cover that comfortably. We're growing our partnerships with OEMs and TSPs all the time in the UK and Europe, and we're looking to carry across our understanding from the US to Europe. Now, with Europe, there's different travel patterns and levels of charger provision, and there's also the fact that many people live in denser housing in the EU and the UK, so they might not have the benefit of a dedicated driveway charging. So the provision of chargers will likely need to be different. There'll be different levels, and we've seen this firsthand from talking to real-life users in and around towns and cities in the United Kingdom. So what we would do is we would urge companies and policymakers to account for both future and EV uptake, how travel patterns evolve in their forward planning. At Wejo, we'd love to be part of that conversation.